Hello everyone, this is Colin once again. I'm making a video addressed to a username by choice Muslim who asked me a question in the comments section of my video, Aussie CDA update 2 months without a video, where he basically asked me about the charge that Imam Ghazali made uh, against the philosophers Ibn Sina and Farabi. Essentially, he charged them with three heretical beliefs: the creation of the universe from pre-existing principle, God knowing only the universal characteristics of particulars, and their denial of bodily resurrection. So this user noted that I had been reading Ibn Rushd, or I have read Ibn Rushd, and want to know what were his final thoughts on these matters, and do I subscribe to any of these beliefs yet. I assume what the user means is, do I subscribe to the three quote-unquote heretical beliefs? And then how do I view the prophets of Islam now? So I think I might have to hold off from answering in full the second question, which is, or rather the third question, which is, how do I view the prophets of Islam now? But I think that deserves a separate video. However, with the current topic of this subject, of these three specific topics, I'm going to link in the description section an online text that's a translation of Ibn Rushd's book on the harmony of religion and philosophy. Excuse me. Because in this text, Ibn Rushd directly comments on Ghazali's charge of unbelief against Farabi and Ibn Sina. And I suggest that you read the entire text. So I'm only going to summarize a section of it. And essentially, what Ibn Rushd's thesis in this book, and also in the Incoherence, is that Ghazali was mistaken in charging the philosophers with unbelief. For an example, he mentions that charging them for the assertion of the world's eternity and God's ignorance of particulars and denial of bodily resurrection is only tentative and not definite. What he means by that is that you may object, I'm quoting now, if we ought not call man an unbeliever for violating unanimity in case of allegorical interpretation, because no unanimity is conceivable in such cases, what do you say about the Muslim philosophers like Abu Nasr and Ibn Sina? For Abu Hamid, or Imam Ghazali, called them both definitely unbelievers in the book of his known as the Incoherence of the Philosophers, on three counts: their assertion of the pre-eternity of the world, and that God the Exalted does not know particulars, may he be exalted from far above that ignorance, and their allegorical interpretation of the passages concerning the resurrection of bodies in states of existence in the next life. We answer, it is apparent from what he said on the subject that his calling them both unbelievers on these counts was not definite, since he made it clear in the Book of the Distinction that calling people unbelievers for violating unanimity can only be tentative. He then goes on to say that such a charge cannot be definite because there has never been a consensus against allegorical interpretation. The Quran itself indicates that it has an inner meaning, which is a special function of the demonstrative class to understand. Okay, so the context of him mentioning this charge against them, against Ibn Sina and Farabi, and how Ghazali is mistaken, is the whole nature of what is allegorical interpretation, the subject of allegorical interpretation. Furthermore, he goes on to talk about how people view Scripture in different ways, that people understand and comprehend religion in different ways. And that's the full context of his entire piece. But this is just a small snippet. Now, he goes on to mention, and I'm reading the bold section here, it says, besides, Ghazali was mistaken in ascribing to the heretics, in other words, the Ibn Sina and Farabi, the opinion that God does not know particulars. Their view is that his knowledge of both particulars and universals differs from ours in being the cause, but an effect of the object known. They even hold that God sends premonitions, in dreams of particular events. Okay, and he elaborates on this point. So in other words, their true argument, which is not what Ghazali mentions, is that it's not that they said that God does not know particulars and universals, it's that how God understands his knowledge is different from ours. So God does not know universals and particulars like we know universals and particulars, because God in his essence and his wisdom is so beyond us that we have no way of knowing how God knows things. And he we can only assume that his knowledge, because it is so beyond us, differs from our own. That's how I would reword their argument. So they're not saying that he does not know something. It's that he knows in a way that's beyond our comprehension. And Averroes elaborates on this. The concept of the question of the world, and this gets into the concept of reality, of time, of eternity, and things like this. He essentially says that the Asherites and the Peripetics and other groups essentially use different terminology to try to explain the same phenomena. So that really it's not an issue of someone being right or wrong, or heretical or correct. It is rather that they are trying to describe something that really falls into the realm of physics, but they're attempting to explain it via a theological way, or at least adding a theological context to a question of physics and the question of reality and time and eternity. So it would be wrong to just say, oh, well, they're heretics because they postulated a certain mode or a certain opinion of reality. And again, he elaborates on this. Farther down, though, he starts talking about the afterlife. And even at the very bottom, he talks about the afterlife. And he says that essentially, at his time in history, and prior to him, there had been these debates amongst scholars of various schools and within schools, that there were different opinions and interpretations of how to interpret the passages about the afterlife. No one in Islamic history denied that there is an afterlife, that the soul does go on, that consciousness does go on. But they differed with regards to when you read the text of the Quran, or you read the text of the Hadith about heaven and hell and the afterlife and the Day of Judgment, whether to interpret them in a certain way. And what will be the mode of the afterlife? Will be like this reality? Will be just spiritual? Will be physical? Will we be resurrected in the exact same bodies as we are in at this current during your lifetime? These are all questions that scholars were discussing with each other. And so, again, he really brings it back to this issue, or this debate topic of allegorical interpretation. So, because there has not been a consensus about the nature of interpreting things allegorically, we cannot say that Ibn Sina and Farabi were heretical or unbelievers because they may have postulated a certain perspective about the afterlife. They did not deny the afterlife or the hereafter, but they may have had a certain perspective or interpretation of said text. These are all the opinions of Ibn Rushd. Now, because I've said this, the first one about God's knowledge being different from our own, well, I obviously cannot hold this, quote, heretical position, because there is no heretical position. Because Farabi and Ibn Sina did not claim what Ghazali says they claimed. With regards to, the universe, the creation of the universe from a pre-existing principle, well, if I look into how I understand how the universe came about, and if I look at science, if I look at physics, if I look at evolution, and if I were to make the argument or interpret what Ibn Sina and Farabi are saying, that God creates certain mechanisms with which we have what we say is reality, or creation. So, for example, a mechanism we could argue is the Big Bang. God created the Big Bang, there was the Big Bang, now we have the cosmos. Evolution is a mechanism of nature, nature is a function of creation. So, if Ibn Sina and Farabi argued that there are principles or mechanisms that essentially are part of the process of creation, and we can understand these things by looking at science, I don't have an issue with that, personally. I don't really see how that's heretical, considering that so many Muslims throughout history, including right now in the 21st century, have bridged the gap between science and religion. I don't see what the problem with that is. Now, with regards to the denial of bodily resurrection, I go with I actually have talked about this in my blog, so I'll link my blog in the more info section. I've talked about my perspective about the afterlife. I agree with Ibn Rushd when he says that there are these various ways of looking at the scriptures regarding the afterlife, and that there are different interpretations, and there are different natures of interpretation and perspectives on this topic. So I don't necessarily go so far as to say that I deny the resurrection, a bodily resurrection. I I think that because of the different interpretations, I think there's room to debate what the nature of the resurrection will be like. And maybe debate's too much of a strong word, just a discussion about the various ways of understanding what the hereafter will be like. But I certainly, as Ibn Rushd says, at the end of the day, Muslims must not deny the concept of the hereafter. There may be debate, and there has been debate, and there have been discussions and various interpretations about what the hereafter will be like, whether it's just completely spiritual or what have you, etc., etc. But we cannot deny the hereafter, that there is something after death, and that consciousness, the soul, will go on. This I do not deny. However, I do like to entertain the various possibilities and interpretations, and I'm still looking into that myself. But I talk about that in my blog, so I feel like I've already covered that. So I hope this answers your questions. Again, I think the issue, and I've discovered this by reading, starting with, Al-Kindi, and then working my way even past Ibn Rushd when it comes to philosophy within Islam, or Kalam as well, that I find that a lot of people stop with Imam Ghazali, and a lot of people don't continue on to Ibn Rushd. So Ibn Rushd wrote 3 principal books on the subject of philosophy and religion, and it was it's a trilogy. His first book is essentially about how he views the core concepts of Islam, how he interprets them, and he takes into consideration the various schools, and he tries to synthesize or understand them objectively. His second book is, again, on the harmony of religion and philosophy, which I'll be linking, which I've been quoting from. And, of course, the third one is his massive book, The Incoherence of the Incoherence, which is a direct refutation to Ghazali's text, The Incoherence of the Philosophers. He also wrote a huge comparative fiqh book that's in 2 volumes, where he objectively discusses the various fiqh positions and perspectives of not only the 4 schools of Sunni thought, but he also mentions, I believe, the Shia, at least the 12 verse, and I know he mentions the Sahiri as well. So, yeah, I hope this answers your questions. And, yeah, if you have any more, please let me know. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of Almighty God be with you all.